Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Kate.
And I'm the younger version of Chad Lott.
This is episode 123. We're going to be talking about The Substance, the Coralie Fargeat film from 2024. And to do so, we have a guest, Monique Jenkinson, aka Fauxnique. Hello.
Hello. And also, I'm Sue.
I was going to say who you are and what you do, but maybe you should just do it because the list is too long for me to competently roll out.
I make performance. I make shows. I write things. I wrote a book about being a drag queen. I also stick magazine pages to my face like the monster at the end of this movie.
True. All right. You can email us at whattthe, WHATTHE, at scarythoughts.org. And does anybody have anything to plug?
I have a rescue Malinois that if you would like a Malinois, you can have it.
Please take this fucking dog.
Please take this dog. Her name is Ripley. In honor of our alien run.
Yeah.
You have to please take this dog.
If you're a real fan, you'll adopt this dog named Ripley.
Yes.
Fauxnique?
I have things to plug coming up quite soon, actually, in March and perhaps in February, some shows. So just be on the lookout for shows at Oasis and then performances at DeRosa Center for Contemporary Art in Napa. If anyone wants to do a road trip to Napa to see me perform with the work of the amazing visual artist Deborah Orapollo.
Great. Spoilers ahead. Where do you guys want to start with this?
Wow.
Yeah, I loved it. To me, it's like, I was saying earlier, the funniest movie I've seen in a long time. I think it's great. It reminds me of all the stuff from the 90s that I liked. And like every time I was like, oh, I think that's referencing this. I went and looked it up and it's completely what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like all the references are like really right there if you are a fan of this shit.
But they don't feel shoehorned in. They don't feel fan servicey. They feel like tributes, which I know there's a fuzzy line between the two. And it's one of those, like, when I like it, it's honoring art, and when I don't like it, it's fan servicing and I hate it. But it does feel of one and not the other kind.
I mean, the eventual creature, when I saw it like unveiled completely, I was like, oh, that's Cronenberg's Fly with the Elephant Man's head.
Yep.
And that's literally what they did, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that the fact that this movie, it's so rigorous aesthetically that then there is room for these really specific but not somehow not shoehorned references.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like, I thought Requiem for a Dream was like all over it, even to the point where they had different names for different forms of the creature. And one of them, when Demi Moore is just like older Demi Moore, they called it like the Requiem one because she looks like the old lady from Requiem for a Dream.
Right.
Oh my God.
And then I thought a lot of the edits, like especially with the sound, like all the Foley stuff was completely out of like Aronofsky.
Gosh. Yeah, I haven't seen Requiem for a Dream in a really long time, and it's tough. I don't know if I ever need to see it again.
It's really hard. It is not funny.
No, it is.
I sort of made a list of things that Carrie, the Elephant Man, Death Becomes Her for sure, The Shining, obviously, The Fly, which even there's a fly in it. And one reference I actually read this online, but I didn't catch it at all, but I guess at the very beginning, a fly gets in her wine, as it like a fly gets in her Chardonnay, like in the song Ironic by Alanis Morissette. That's a reference in this fucking movie. Videodrome, Society. Yeah, anyway. Almost every body horror movie ever is kind of wrapped up in this one.
Yeah.
Or big box office body horror, that is.
Yeah, she seems to be really like the director, what's her name? Coltrane?
Coralie Fargeat.
Yeah. It seems to be really like representative of this sort of like French female new wave thing that's going on. I guess that like they all go to the same film school and it's like a pretty rigorous film school.
Do they have to send in headshots for themselves before they get in? They're all really hot, which is really bizarre.
Yeah.
They're French.
I'm into
They're
it.
French. Yeah. Fair enough.
They're not a French. I mean, I think there is maybe a French cultural thing of like not being afraid of being hot and also
Definitely.
powerful, that we have a little bit more of a dichotomy here that you're either or. I feel like in at least France and Italy.
Yeah.
I think maybe England and here you're like either hot or smart, but France and Italy, I feel like you're more allowed to be hot and smart.
Or you stop trying to be hot. Like you get your job or you get your ring, and then you just don't need to bother as much anymore. Outside of France and Italy.
Well,
whereas in France and Italy, they're like, well, no, why would I stop being this thing that I value?
Right. Although, I just, listening to an interview with her, this film is about, it isn't specifically about Hollywood. It is about women and beauty standards. And, she is, French beauty standards are fucking cuckoo, bananas,
intense,
horrible, intense. I wanted to talk about, I just kind of jump right into one of my favorite things and one of the most effective things about the filmmaking in this as a woman, and I think what she's doing as a woman filmmaker is this what you would first kind of categorize as like a hypersexualized male gaze from the camera. But then it's so intense and so specific and so close up, especially on the body parts, that what I halfway through identified and what feels so brilliant to me is like it is the subjective self female gaze. It's the inner voice, body dysmorphic female gaze on the female body.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. And the director, she talked about how she was trying to mimic the male gaze. I was like, she's not really getting it, kind of. Like she's getting like Verhoeven style film version or even like a Michael Bay like sort of camera sweeping. But I think the focusing on the specific body parts is, not to speak for the ladies, but it's like a woman thing. Like my wife and I were talking about that I've never heard a man say the word cellulite.
Oh, totally.
In conversation outside, unless it's come up and you're speaking about like right now, right? Like I've obviously said the word, but like I think men sort of like take the whole thing in, unless it's like pornography and it's like really focused. Like there's that scene after like the weird little tumor pops out of her butt, and then the guys,
chicken thigh.
yeah, and then the guys are all looking at the camera, moving really slow. I was like, that's the most male gaze-ish thing in it. And it is specifically to one body part, but that had more of like a pornographic feel to me than the rest of the stuff.
Right. And it's very specifically like the men in the film are gazing at her body. It's not the camera point of view of the film, which, I agree. And yes, men don't speak of cellulite. They barely even speak the word thighs. And women are like obsessed with like, not just their thighs general, but like very specific things about their thighs and their butts and their, it's really, it gets granular and specific and super horrifying.
Yeah.
And it can ruin your life or rule your life, Well,
one thing about butts that I thought was interesting is when I didn't know who made this movie when I saw it, I just didn't think about it. But halfway in, I was like, the camera spends so much time on Margaret Qualley's butt. Like it's just framed so much of the time. And I was like, this is reminding me of that movie Revenge, that was basically a rape revenge movie that spent most of its time with a camera pointed at the protagonist's ass, and like, oh, it's actually the same filmmaker. Like, I didn't know it was the same filmmaker. I just noticed how much time the camera spent pointing at the protagonist's butt, and that was what I picked up on. That's like, I guess that is her directorial signature.
There's a lot of butts in Titan too.
Yeah. Oh, good point. I also wonder if this, I hate to play this game, just forgive me for bringing it up though. If this movie was made by a man, if we would feel differently about how predatory the camera is on the body, on these women's bodies, if we would somehow want to critique its scrutinization. And that leads me to two things. One, what does it mean when a woman makes a work of art that does these specific things about the female body. But then also, what does it mean when a French woman does this in a way that we're not very familiar with from a Hollywood movie, even from female directors? And it sort of reminds me of, Monique, I've talked with you about this before. We have a friend who is an actor in Hollywood, and he's Black, and he was talking about how there are a lot of roles that are taken by Black actors from England, from the UK.
All of The Wire, for example.
All of The Wire. And part of that is, there's a thing, this is not an absolute statement, but a lot of American actors would not play those characters. They don't want, a lot of American Black actors are like, I'm not playing a gangster.
They don't want to,
I don't want to replicate these stereotypes in American cinema. I'm sick of that shit. I refuse. Don't cast me in these essentially racist roles. Whereas Black actors in the UK don't have that history. It's not that they're outside of racism. It's just that they don't have that relationship to race and cinema the way American Black actors do.
Hamlet again? I want to play a gangster in Baltimore.
Totally.
Part of it too, though, I imagine, is like just how far you have to go from England to Hollywood to get that role. I imagine if I went across the world to do something, even my dumb job, I would take whatevs. You know, I'd be like, man, this role is great. I'll do 5 more.
I mean, yeah, I think our illusions about how much choice Hollywood actors have is really inflated. Like, it's always funny to me, like hearing what it's like to be an actor and try and get work, and then hearing people say things like, how do you choose your roles? And the actor is always like,
I don't understand the question.
You know, well, a lot of them now are just like straight up. They're like, I didn't have the luxury of choosing my roles for the first 15 years of my career or after a certain point. I mean, I think that's what's really so interesting about this film, actually. I feel like it was one of the questions that I just in this interview with Coralie Fargeat was about whether she wrote with Demi Moore in mind, and she didn't. She wrote with an icon in mind, but wasn't sure who would say yes. And they actually thought Demi Moore was a long shot, and that she'd say no, and that she wouldn't want to kind of subject her image. I think it was an interesting quote that she said something like that she wouldn't be ready to destroy her image the way that this role requires. And then she was super surprised by Demi Moore, her book, you know, what she had to say about Hollywood.
I thought that was really interesting. The book thing was like when the director was like, oh, I don't know about you. And Demi Moore was like, here's my book. And to me, it's like such a like an old school LA Hollywood person. Because I just listened to the Joe Rogan episode with Josh Brolin on it today. He just wrote a book. And there's so many times, like there's a whole part where Josh Brolin's like, do you have my book? You know, and it's like, okay, like it's going to explain you. And there's something funny about like an actor. It seems like Demi Moore, like really, she might have had a ghostwriter, but like she really wrote that book, and it was important to her. I feel like I have to read it now.
I know. I feel like I have to read it too. It from what I could hear there were parts of it in her interview with her Fresh Air interview, and it sounded pretty well written. I mean, ghostwriter or not, she chose the right one.
Yeah, some of those actor books, you don't think they're going to be great, but they kind of are. Like I read Val Kilmer's. It's awesome. Like, and it definitely, there's a certain type of actor like this, like kind of Peter Weller-ish, like they're actors. You know, Josh Brolin definitely on the JRE was kind of like that, you know, and it's just, you get the feeling that they're all trying to be like jazz mans. Or something like that. Like they have this like idea of like the artist and the Dionysian spirit, but it's not really. They just have the idea that they should be about that kind of. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Demi, it sounds like she's just reflecting a lot on this thing that she's been, and it's been so much about her body. You know, over the years, like the iconic. I mean, all of these iconic images of her. The iconic image of her painted and naked on the cover of Vanity Fair, and then her pregnant and naked cover on Vanity Fair. You know, so many, she's already kind of busted a lot of body taboos already. So it kind of completely makes sense for her to do this film. And she also looks amazing.
I know that was one of the things I always think about when I first saw it. I was like, I would not kick Demi Moore at this stage out of bed.
No, and she's like,
you know.
she's 62. She's playing 50. The character's supposed to just have turned 50, but she's, 62. I mean, that's Hollywood 62.
I was thinking though, like, I mean, not to get too nerdy about the details of the film, but I mean, if you're still doing aerobics on TV at 50, that's pretty good.
Yes.
It feels like. I mean, who else has done that but Richard Simmons?
Jane Fonda was in her 40s, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
But she had kind of come back to it, right? Like,
I think so.
yeah.
She had come back. Yeah, that was like her second act, the whole aerobics thing.
Although we could imagine that Elizabeth's character, that was her second act too, because she was an Oscar winner.
Right.
So she wasn't just an aerobics instructor. She wasn't a Richard Simmons. She was a Jane Fonda.
Yeah, there's like a Kubrickian mirroring throughout this whole thing where it's like, you know, like she is ending up as the dance instructor and then Sue starts like that and goes off.
Right. Although this is what I love about this movie. The fact that it's the quality of it, that it is a fable and it plays like that. I think that's part of its rigor, is that it's structured as a fable. So there's all of this kind of genericism in it, right? Like she's on a TV show called The Show. The Show has a special New Year's Eve show
called New Year's Eve
New
show.
Year's Eve show. Yeah, it's all of this. And I thought that part of it was brilliant. And we really don't get to connect to the characters. We don't get to know much. And I think that, you know, it is very much posited as a brutal world. It's not like she's surrounded by people who've loved her career and been like, oh, you know, you want to retire at 50? That's great. You've done a great job. That's cool. It's like forced retirement because she's not viable, quote unquote. I mean, all of these symbolic things that happen, you know, she finishes up shooting the show. She goes into the hallway. The women's room is out of order. So she has to go to the men's room, which, like, okay, that's a plot thing, so she can hear Harvey, right? A guy, an odious Hollywood type named Harvey, talk about her. But also, I thought it was striking. I didn't notice this the first time, but the second time around, like the women's room being out of order, it's like there's literally no place for her. Yeah. So she has to go into this other space. And then just... yeah, this way in which it works in that fable kind of way. Like the fairy said, thou shalt not prick your finger on the spindle, but she touched the spindle. And then those kinds of things always happen in fairy tales. And I think we have to have a kind of these generic characters that we're not super invested in as real people in order for this to work. And I think Sue, the reason I bring it up when you said Sue starts that way, it's true, but I also think this is the tragedy of it, is like she gets this wish, she gets this lease on life, and she can't get more creative than try and just go get her old stupid job.
Yeah.
So tragic.
Yeah, Demi Moore made a really great point about that, where she said, you know, like one of these people at Cannes asked her, and by the way, your French accent thing is going to affect me, and I'm probably going to try and French accent it out, but it's not going to work because I learned French.
Can is pronounced can. People think it's pronounced con.
Yeah, I can't do it. I mean, I learned French in Louisiana, so my French is terrible.
Burgundy.
It's like worse than if I had just learned it in Texas or something like that. But Demi Moore, like one of the people interviewing her at one of these panels, was kind of like, you know, have you ever felt like canceled or whatever, you know, because of your age? And she had a very like Viktor Frankl kind of point about it, where she's like, well, you know, that's really whatever's happening, it's in your mind how you deal with it. And she said the tragedy of the character is that she's still herself. So all she really could figure out how to do is go do that again. I mean, like with her young, super hot new body, she could have literally done pretty much anything. She's just going back to her own old bullshit.
Right. And if there had been some sense of her as a richer person, as a deeper person, she could have gone and done something. You know, there could have been this like fulfilling and beautiful relationship between these two.
Or like, I always wanted to go to medical school. Like, you could have done that. You could have done anything else except you're just like doing your thing again.
Doing this shallow, horrible thing because it's kind of all she knows, right? We've created this really myopic little world.
I sort of want to go further into that and further against it at the same time. On the one hand, I can totally sympathize with it because it's what she was still doing, and it is where her values do lie. Mm-hmm. So I can totally understand her wanting to conquer the thing that she was rejected for. Yeah. Also, what her youthful beauty opens the door for is what she did, like the most. Mm-hmm. It could open her up to medical school. She could have gone to medical school at any point. It's not like her, as someone who just got a master's a few days ago, basically, you know, you can do that shit whenever you want. What does youth genuinely afford you? It doesn't afford you the chance to go back to school and become a nurse. It affords you the chance to go be exactly. However, contrary to that is that so much of her character is based in denial. That death is coming for all of us. It's the only thing that's certain. And how we relate to that death is how we organize our lives. And this movie, to me, is about how so many women organize their life relative to their oncoming death, which, takes on this slow form on how they look. And I don't want to blame her for getting fired, but it's one of those things like, okay, Monique and I have had this conversation many times, like Monique as a dancer, at some point, your body's just not going to do it as well anymore. And that can't be a surprise.
Right.
It can fucking suck and it can break your heart because it's something you've invested your life in, but you can't go, wait, what?
Right.
How did that happen?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes me think of something else that occurred to me while I was watching this was, say she got started in Hollywood when she was 20, right? And she's 50 now. She got 30 years of being professionally hot, or I mean, she probably maybe she had like a really good acting role or something like that. But, like I'll feel lucky if I'm making insurance commercials at 50, like if I get to keep doing what I'm doing and by that age, right. So it's like, well, what does the world really owe you?
Yep.
Well, I think that this film is about how the world fucks you over. Mm-hmm. We can only assume that this, that her whole world is full of disgusting men like Harvey fucking her over. I mean, I'm in the middle of reading Cassandra Peterson's memoir right now, Elvira.
Well, I have that on about halfway through it.
Yeah.
Like, it's really how she got started is just so
amazing as an underage showgirl. But there's, just a whole chapter that's basically a catalog of like shitty things men did to me. And it's horrible, and she's like a really strong, capable woman with a sense of humor, and she's actually a deeply intelligent person. So I can imagine just this someone like Elizabeth Sparkle, she's built her career around this, and I think the filmmaker, as she was talking about this, just the way women are seen and treated is violent.
Totally. But this movie is woman on woman violence.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Which I think is widespread.
Oh,
like I always tell, like my wife has always had these beefs with like, she's a powerful professional woman, right? Mm-hmm. And her biggest beefs are with other powerful professionals. It's like beta fish, like they just can't, I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's envy and there is sisterhood, and sisterhood is powerful, but like and this is, not to put too fine a point on it or too heavy a hand on it, but this is about violence to the self, totally, literalized violence against the self.
That's one of the things I think is great about this movie is like, the dudes are disgusting, they're gross, like, and they're like cartoonish, right? They have every type of shitty guy you would want in this movie, but they're like almost like the weather in this.
Yes.
They're just there, like hyenas would be there in the plains of Africa.
Yes, of course, there are shitty men in Hollywood.
And then It's interesting. The one guy who's supposed to be like the good guy is still really unappealing.
So
you know?
doesn't he feel like he feels like either a David Lynch character or just David Lynch himself?
Oh, there's so much David Lynch in it. I mean, she's a noted fan of
The
him.
most beautiful girl in the whole wide world. Like the
Yeah.
fact that he says whole wide world is so David Lynch.
Yeah, totally. It's like his whole like Northwestern G. Willikers.
That'd be neat.
Yeah, I love that shit.
I do
Like,
too.
Yeah.
I thought it does this very broad. It's very broad.
Mhm.
So it has broad types.
If we can just rewind for just a second and talk more about women on women violence. There's something about
I'd
this
love
that
to.
reminds me, excellent. I'm just trying to get us away from blaming the patriarchy because I feel like it needs someone to stand up for it.
I'm not. I hope you don't think I'm just blaming the patriarchy and
you never
thinking
did.
that
No.
and that thinking that the filmmaker is doing that. I think she's doing a lot more. I think she started there and came up with something really resonant and deep, which is why why this film is rippling out so well.
Yeah,
Sorry,
totally.
go ahead.
Oh, no. I was being very sarcastic. But there's a way in which this reminds me of Counterpart, which we've all seen. I'm sorry, I'm totally forgetting the TV show Counterpart.
J.K. Simmons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So just for our listeners who haven't seen it, in a nutshell, in the way it pertains to the way I'm thinking, there's a science experiment that takes place, and it basically creates a copy of the world of our universe. And these two universes are just barely in contact with one another, but they start to evolve in different directions. From the point the split is created, they become two different universes that were absolutely identical in, like 1984, September 1st or whatever. And then by the next day, they just start evolving differently. And the more time goes on, the more they really, really become different, and they start influencing each other, and one goes up and one goes down. And this movie does that too, where there is this split where you are the same. You are one. But the second she looks in the mirror, they become completely different people, right? It doesn't matter that they have an identical past. Her self-appraisal, the way people look at her, the power she is now afforded with youth and beauty, that she somehow immediately privileges over the power of age and wisdom, aids in splitting them off into radically different directions, such that they are, this movie has two protagonists and two antagonists, and they're the same people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I kept looking for thinking like, oh, here's where it turns. And I think it kind of, actually, I don't know if it's the second she looks in the mirror. It feels like a little more gradual, because at first there's a kind of tenderness. Like I remarked out loud the second time I watched it that there's just so many beautiful, meticulous shots in this film. I mean, all the close-up stuff is incredible, but there's a shot that's just really painterly of like after Sue sews Elizabeth's back up, and Elizabeth's like, like fetal position on the floor with her black hair sort of spread out, and Sue is like sitting on the edge of the tub, like with her head in her hands, looking at Elizabeth with her black hair kind of stringy. And there's a tenderness in that shot. And that's sort of the last time we have tenderness. Like she sews up her back, and that's the sort of like disgusting. It's almost like she's all of a sudden like changing her mom's diaper, that the sewing up of the back feels like this tedious care, and also like tedious care, like, and disgusting, she's like almost retching. And then this sort of tedious care for the future self that we all ought to do. Right? We are all, and I want to talk about that a little more later. Like that's a very deep, it's a very much a psychological concept that, I kind of talk about with my therapist a lot, like being kind to my future self, setting my future self up for success, not assuming my future self wants to do the things my current self doesn't want to do, but then also like being kind to my future self by being kind to my current self, and like by kind of thinking about the future and not being in denial of death. I think there was like a tenderness in that moment that then gets undone when she like feels her hot body in the shower. And it's almost like the lust for youth overcomes the tenderness toward age, and then that immediately gets, then the bloody nose comes right after that. There's just these one after the other. It's a long movie, but it kind of moves at this clip.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because it reminds me that the end of her first episode in her Sue's new show, like the show is over, she starts to walk away, and then she flips around and goes, "Take care of yourself," which is interesting because she doesn't take care of her own self.
Yes.
She's clearly spent an entire lifetime trying to hone her body as an instrument and an object of desire and pleasure. Maybe not pleasure. Let's just say desire. Pleasure's too fraught. But she isn't practicing that.
No, it's such a funny joke.
Yeah.
It's such a like one-liner, and it just sort of works. I mean, there's something about the simplicity of the language in this film too that really works in a way that often European films that are working in this Hollywood realm don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So earlier you were talking about this as being a fable, and I think that definitely tracks. It certainly, something I really appreciate about it is that it's kind of one conceit. It's not, like Star Wars is like, there's the Force, also there's space travel, also there's hyperspace travel, and there's a million kinds of aliens, and also midichlorians, and also like there's just so many things. Whereas this is like, there's a science, it'll do this thing. Mm-hmm. Go. I love the simplicity of it. You have to suspend your disbelief really, really hard for this one thing, but you don't have to suspend your disbelief for like 12 things. However, there's a lot about it that has absurd inherent contradictions.
Yeah,
which is
if you're going to be
fine.
a hard, like, what are the rules of engagement nerd with this? It's like, it is a mess. Like, when are they separate? When are they the same? When are they separate? When are they the same? How does she know how to do anything? How is she not just like when Sue's born? How is she not just like, the mermaid in Splash, like without knowing anything?
I sort of assume.
So they have brains. They have each other's brain, but they don't have each other's memories.
I think they have each other's memory. I think they're the exact same person.
Yeah.
But just Sue is just then makes the decision to just be her desire to live in this way overrides any sense of ethic, and she just turns cruel. Like, that's the whole part of.
Well, I think like what's interesting is, assuming that they split with the same brain, the same memories, it's like copies and they go off on their own, is like Elizabeth is clearly just actually a shitty person, like that, like given the opportunity to be a nightmare,
she would even fuck herself. She is so ready to step on people to get what she wants in life. She would even self-destruct.
Oh yeah, God. And that's so true of so many people.
Yeah.
I mean, so many women in a very specific way, but so many people. I mean, we know so many people who are just fucking their future selves over.
Totally.
By being, whatever, drug addicts or.
Yeah, but do like, I mean, not to get too much into the trifling of this, but because
I actually love it in this.
Yeah, like I mean, I love like one of the things I like in sort of like soft sci-fi or like what if stories is like, there's a set of rules, like Gremlins, for example, feed it after midnight, don't get it wet. Like, and
I was totally thinking about Gremlins.
I thought about Gremlins the whole time.
Oh, totally. I didn't think about Gremlins at all, but obs.
But this is also like, you would send me this text, like come with some Tales from the Crypt shit. And then like, it's totally a Tales from the Crypt thing, and a lot of like the writing, like, there was like 4 dudes at one point that were doing like 3 or 4 different EC Comics titles at the same time. And, you just imagine they're sitting in this office being like, okay, a witch doctor. And then this happens. And then it's just these like hokey premises. But based on the rules of this, there's no upside of this for Elizabeth. Like it like can only go bad. It's not like your brain transfers into the younger body and then you'd have this tension of like, am I going to destroy myself to stay young for a little bit longer? You're just like, you're
right. But that to me is the biggest. Actually, it's a plot hole, especially later when she calls and is like, I want to terminate the experiment or whatever the verbiage is, and she hesitates. And the thing is, her watching Sue, which is, quote, her, but it's not her. It is someone else now and has been for a long time. What has she been getting from this since the split? What does Elizabeth get out of it? And the answer is half the time she's lying on a bathroom floor, and she wakes up and gets to see this other version of herself living it up. Unfortunately for me, the big flaw in the fable is that there is no benefit to Elizabeth. She knows she can terminate and chooses not to. Why? She hates it. She hates Sue. She's not getting pleasure. It's not her.
Yeah.
She's reaping no reward. She's only reaping the negative side effects of it.
It would be interesting to see her like raking in piles of money from Sue or something.
Yeah.
Or like, what if she like took fluid out of Sue's back and put it in her cell? Like, what happens to her?
Right.
Like,
What would happen?
I thought that's totally where it was going to go. And later on, when she runs into the other guy that's doing the experiment and he tells her the number, I thought for sure there was going to be some sort of like her heisting his fluid, at one point. But it just goes in a different direction.
Another part of the equation that I think is really fun to think about is that, okay, the substance is made by some shady business. And, if it's a fable, maybe it's just a company that metes out justice for shallow people. Like, that's just ridiculous. Okay, it's a shady pilot program. So as it stands now, it is not profitable. It seems that it is inherently destructive. Right? There's something they need to figure out. So there's no discussion of money changing hands, but whether it does or not, this is a virus that eats its own host.
Yes.
Right? If they're supposed to make money off of this, it is a very failed project. It doesn't last very long. And the test subjects implode. So maybe it's a pilot program and they're still figuring it out. So is the goal for this to like actually work long term and sustained? And if this was a real business, wouldn't they have, for example, counselors on call to help you sort your shit out with your alter?
Right. Yeah. This film it isn't interested in that kind of world. It's just interested in creating, a very brutal world. I love too, just the language, the other language thing I loved was like self, like food for other self. Like they're both you, but one is the other.
Right.
And there's just so much, all the design stuff. I mean, I have like a list of all the design stuff that's so amazing. Because there's also, and I'm sure, with the way films get made, this movie was simultaneous with the Barbie movie and couldn't be commenting on it. It was all filmed and, done and dusted, I'm sure, by the time anyone saw the Barbie movie. But there's so many, I feel like this would be a really interesting like thing to talk about in that context, because they're like flip sides. They're both fables, but the Barbie movie is like, she chooses to be, she sees an old woman in the world and decides to be human and have a soul and live in imperfection and grow old and die. And this is sort of the opposite, the very opposite. But there's something about Sue that's so Barbie, and she's like sinister Barbie. And then it's like played to me for comedy so much, like especially there's she's wearing a t-shirt that I just thought was so hilarious in one of the earlier, when she does all of her home improvements, her t-shirt says Summertime Hawaii Club. Which is like the show. Yeah. The New Year's Eve show. The Substance. It's this generic, amazing. Yeah. Anyway,
it's also, speaking of that, it's also placeless. Like there's a Hollywood star that gets snow on it, which makes no sense. The New Year's Eve show is on a sunny day. It's clearly Hollywood, but it was shot in France, I believe, mostly. Yeah. Also, the time, like there's no internet. There's people use newspapers.
Want ads.
But there's flat screen TVs. The car thing I think is really interesting because it's all vintage cars until the emergence of Sue, and then you start to get contemporary sports cars. It's mostly luxury automobiles, but they're like vintage muscle cars in the beginning of the movie, and then it becomes all contemporary cars in the background. There's not a lot of outdoor shots.
The design is brilliant.
Totally.
It reminded me of like It Follows in the way that it's sort of outside of time.
Totally.
A little bit. But it makes me think too, like maybe that's just how France is, because like when you look at movies that there's like car movies in France, there is like a bunch of weird, here's a bunch of vintage cars, here's a new car, and like I don't know.
I think it's intentional, and I think it's probably, this school of French filmmakers being kind of obsessed with Hollywood in a very specific way and LA in a very specific way, because car culture is not what it is, in France, but
Because of their lack of freedom.
I was just thinking about like a really simple little thing, like in the video for the substance, or it's later in the film where he's like, maybe it is in the substance demo video, where there's a piece of clay that gets divided in two, and one gets rolled into a neat little ball and the other one stays in like a gloppy, uneven mess. Even just down to that, it's so smart.
Yeah, like the egg in the very beginning.
There's graffiti next to the sketchy place where they go to pick up the substance. That's basically the egg splitting.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
One of the things you're talking about, the design elements, I was thinking about the art direction of the actual substance stuff. It's so shitty and shoddy, but that's how that biohacker stuff really is. Like my wife, again, on the reference, she is not afraid of trying Chinese mail order compounds for stuff. Like she was doing like B12 injections at the place for like $60 a pop. And she's like, there's no way. You have to be able to buy these chemicals online. And so she just ordered a bunch of needles and shit off this shady ass website. And it came to her house, had to keep it refrigerated and stuff. And she was just shooting B12 into her leg just from some private compound thing. And it was, based on her blood work, it was working just as well as the other stuff. I was like, no fucking way. And one time she hit a nerve in her leg and she was like,
No.
But the substance totally reminded me of her like weird biohacking stuff that she's done. And just even like buying like protein supplements and stuff, it all this shit looked like it came off of an Instagram ad. And like even the font on all this stuff was sort of like shitty screen printed. It wasn't pharmaceutical at all. It's very much like that. This is the kind of stuff you would get if you were ordering. It's just south of like Dave Asprey bulletproof coffee nonsense.
There is one scene in the film where the font of one of the pieces of packaging goes kind of pixelated. Like again, it's this extreme close up where you can sort of see the ink running a little bit.
Speaking of design, I'm kind of strangely on board with the French cinema conceit of having impact font in really giant letters as intertitles. Do they all do that? Or do I just really notice it when it happens?
Who else does that? Tarantino obviously does that a little bit. And he's into all that foreign cinema.
Well, I'm thinking of, what's his name? Irreversible Climax, that guy.
Yeah.
He does it.
Did she do it in The Bad Batch?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting.
It's just like a zeitgeisty thing.
Yeah.
It happens a few times in Seth Rogen's TV version of Preacher too, like quite a bit. They use it a lot. So I wonder where it comes from.
Should have researched this in advance.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can only do so much in this life unless you get a substance. Then you can split yourself up and go off.
No.
What would happen if how long would it go on, and at what point does Sue start to get older and be like, yeah, I'm going to take the substance and have another even younger version of myself to carry on? And
yeah, I mean, that was something I was thinking about, because in the film, obviously they try to do it an off-label way, and she's like, I got to get out of this fucking trap of this bullshit. I think it's after she's killed her older self.
Yeah.
And then, you're like, oh, could you just make a copy of a copy of a copy and just keep going?
Maybe.
I think the end is what happens, the
full Cronenberg.
Yeah. I think there's something in that. Okay, at the very end, when she's basically saying, "I'm not an animal, I'm a man."
right.
She says, it's me. I'm the same. But what's funny is it seems that she's speaking that from the point of view of a revelation.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
this movie exists in a state of denial about her age,
Yes.
and her denial just ramps up and up and up and up and up. And that, it seems to me, I interpret that as the moment where she is in no denial.
Right.
She's like, I'm the same. But what's funny is everything that got her there was her refusal to believe. Like, she put all of her energy and worth into how she looks. So for her to say, I'm the same, is almost an absurdity.
Right.
She was trying to change her insides by changing her outsides. So she's not the same.
Or maybe it's like, yeah, she's changed and maybe she finally has a self. Something I noticed and then was corroborated by the filmmaker is that so you have all this horror, this literal horrified feelings. You have Sue losing her tooth, which is such a hilarious moment, like the losing of the teeth.
So good.
And then the losing of the ear, but especially like the lost teeth. And when she's just like sobbing with she looks like a 7-year-old. She's suddenly turned into a 7-year-old with like missing teeth.
Yeah.
But also, and there's just something so abject about that. But she's horrified. And then the monster version just kind of tenderly puts her earrings in her weird butthole crevices on her head and like tenderly glues this photo to her face, and it's actually the first time she sort of is kind to herself.
Yeah.
And isn't horrified. She doesn't look in the mirror as a monster and go like, "Wah!" She just kind of pulls herself together and does what she needs to do.
Puts together a look and goes out the door.
I kind of love that she like Eurovisions it, like when she comes back in and is like monstrous with this weird face thing, everybody's just like, yes, like just like they just
Well,
kind of
I think
accept
it's a hallucination. All the people who are like, yay, you belong. Like at first I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. They don't notice. But then it's
they
a
cut
hallucination.
and the hallway's actually
The hallway's empty.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I didn't notice it till the second time I watched it either.
Yeah.
It's funny that putting together a look thing and what I was saying about it's me, I'm the same, is that it makes me think of the way we wear masks, the way we dress, the way we put on makeup, these things that we do externally that give, you put on a face and it helps you get out the door. You put on a look, you put on a uniform, and it transforms how you perform in the world. And so to my mind, I don't want to be too abstract, but to me, that's all technology, right? Like anything that's not what you were born with is technology.
Yes.
And the substance is technology, but so is her makeup. And so there's this really interesting parallel moment.
So is Pilates, so is all
totally
of that stuff
true.
is technology.
That's totally true. I was thinking about when she's getting ready for the date.
Mm-hmm.
And she
sad.
redoes her makeup so many times, and it seems to me that that's another layer of like she's taking a technology, which is makeup, and trying to employ it to feel differently about herself, and it's failing her, so she fucks it up aggressively, right? She interferes with the process and undermines its ability to do its job for her, which is exactly how she uses the substance.
Right. Well, and it's also like her fucking up her face. I mean, I feel like we've all had moments like that where you're like, I'm just going to ruin the whole thing because it's not perfect, you know? And it's a little bit like when...
I've never done that.
It's like when, the guy, I don't know why it reminded me of this, that guy had a tantrum on the baking show and like threw his cake in the garbage instead of just like taking his not perfect cake to the showstopper, to the challenge. And
garbage cake
we women be talking about garbage cake, but yeah,
deep cut scary thoughts.
Yeah
I had a garbage cake moment over Halloween. Yeah,
oh wow.
So we live in a suburban neighborhood now, so trick-or-treating's a thing. And I had bought a lot of candy.
Yes.
And then so I had all these like Twix bars, which is my fucking kryptonite. And I had like probably like 50 of them left. And I was like, I'm going to eat all these. But at one point I like threw them in the garbage. And then like 7 hours later, I went and grabbed one off the top of the garbage.
Fuck yes.
Totally.
I did only grab the one though.
That's good. Yeah. That's good.
But I thought about your garbage cake story.
Garbage cake, garbage Twix. That's amazing. And that's also so that moment, like she has the old crone finger.
Oh, that's my favorite effect in the whole movie. It's just so good.
amazing.
There's a guy named Billy Trident. He was I guess the way I would describe what he does is he makes artisanal mall ninja weapons.
Okay.
And so like he makes
Artisanal mall ninja weapon.
yeah, it's all this like brass knuckles and like sticks with spikes and shit. And like there's
Okay.
a whole scene of guys that make just like handcraft mall ninja weapons, right? And he has one called Witch Finger, and it's literally like this like acrylic. I don't know what it's made out of, but it's like this long thing, and it's both an occult object because the guy's into some sort of weird Aleister Crowleyan stuff, so it's
great.
imbued with all these esoteric occult symbols on it, but it's literally just like a long weird witch finger. But it's an impact weapon, so you can kill someone with it, but it's also a pipe, so you can smoke out of it.
That's
And
amazing.
so I was like, man, I want a Demi Moore Witch Finger.
Amazing.
Try to sneak that through TSA. That's all I can think about.
You're like, I took the substance. It went wrong. I tried to steal too much from my older self. But she has the witch finger, and then she's getting ready for the date, and she, she still looks so beautiful, and it's so tragic. And then it's like she could have just stopped there, but she doesn't. And it is a little bit like that smart thing that I've heard a lot and I've felt a lot. And our dear friend Johnny once said, I was looking at a photo of myself. I was like, oh, I look so meh. And he was like, you're going to look at that photo in 10 years and you won't believe how great you looked. I'm like, oh my God.
I've
you're
heard
so
stuff like
right.
that before. It's like, I can't remember how it goes. It's very similar, but it's like your later fat self will look at your current fat self and be
Yes,
jealous.
Exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah. When I look at myself, I'm like, I can't believe, I thought I was fat. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of that. It's definitely playing on all of that here. I feel like the laughs are unexpected. Like there's certain things that could have been played for the humor that isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I thought what Coralie Fargeat said about the humor was interesting. As part of it, she said she wanted, like, partly the humor was there to create distance from the violence, so that the violence, to get you to think about the violence and not be just traumatized by the violence, which is feels so French.
See, the violence is the part that I thought was the funniest. Like, I mean, just I laughed way too hard when she was smashing the face into the mirror.
Yeah, there's something about like people's heads and faces getting bashed in that I just can't watch.
Don't watch Irreversible.
I already was planning on not watching Irreversible.
Dennis Quaid's Bruce Buffer suits, they're Dolce & Gabbana.
Are they?
Yeah, I was like, I wonder if this is just like somebody made them or these actually exist in the world as atrocious suits, and they're real atrocious suits. But I feel like dressing like that would be pretty cool. I thought that was a weird choice for that character because it does make the character seem like, when you see Harvey, what's the guy's name? Harvey Weinstein?
Harvey Weinstein is...
He just looks like a grotesque bank manager.
Yes.
You know, whereas Dennis Quaid, it's like that look, it's almost more like a camera facing sort of look. And like, is he also part of the like, is he a guy who like kind of got out of it and is running the stuff now?
Was he like a fitness guy?
Yeah. Like a Jack LaLanne type.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting choice. And again, more of maybe like, they don't have fat people in France, so maybe it wouldn't occur to her to make him like a fat guy.
Yeah.
But I think that could have been a choice to really lean into the Harvey Weinstein-ness of it. But I think there's something about, there's a certain kind of like wolf with the eyes bugging out kind of quality that Dennis Quaid's character has, like cartoon wolf with the eyes bugging out character. Well, and just subtext of Dennis Quaid being a Trumper.
I thought that was Randy Quaid.
I think it's Dennis Quaid.
I think it's Randy Quaid. Well,
You
Randy
think
Quaid.
it's
Randy
both of
Quaid.
them?
Last I read about Randy Quaid, he was living out of his car in Vancouver and
Good for
talking
him.
about flat Earth and
I
5G
did,
and shit.
I googled Dennis Quaid politics,
Oh, really?
but I think he
Good, well,
did
good for him. He just got a little win.
great. Ugh. But
Interesting.
he was doing the kind of Trump thing with his mouth where he's just like
Yeah.
and the way they were filming it too is like, oh, they're doing the like Trump is just a talking butthole. Like literally, like he's filmed literally like he is an asshole. Like he's literally an asshole.
Yeah.
I thought that was really hard to watch and a really great choice.
Yeah, I wonder how different this would have been with Ray Liotta. Who had died, you know, if you're
That'd
listening
been
to this
really
and you didn't.
Ray was that was her plan. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, I mean, he was cast.
That's
and,
right,
like,
and he died.
And then so Dennis. I mean, it's just. I was thinking about too, like Dennis Quaid and Demi Moore. They're very established, you know, and this is like a pretty indie film. And I'm just curious about the process of like how did this French indie film script get to these people? And I know the budget was quite small. So like one, how do you even afford Demi Moore, you know? And I was thinking about her too, is like there's a tradition of like famous actors in decline being in shitty schlocky horror movies. All of Canon Films, right? Like that, like that's the entire history of Canon Films is get a star on their way down and put them in your stupid fucking movie and make 80s glory, right? Which is pretty much what this is. But it seems to have had more of a Mickey Rourke and the Wrestler effect for Demi Moore here. And I love in another interview, she talks about how she knew this would either be a total piece of shit train wreck or awesome. And I think like that's like a pretty brave move for somebody to do this. And especially it's not like, I mean, all the nudity and stuff. It's not like she's just like Sigourney Weaver showing up in Cabin in the Woods. It's like your cooch is out for this movie, you know?
Yeah.
Her like mature woman breasts and her body, and you know, I mean, again, she looks amazing.
She looks great.
But,
like
I think there's something different from the Canon Films thing. It seems to me that we're now in an era where stars make different casting choices than they used to 20 years ago, where just think of horror cinema of the last, let's say 15 years, right? Most of elevated horror has stars, usually older. You could say on their way down, you could say at the height of their powers, kind of both at the same time. Do all these stars just sort of make a friendly deal with the casting agents to be in these indie films lately? Like I feel like I feel like really big Hollywood stars now are in more independent cinema than they used to be. That might be the effect of prestige TV just changing the rules.
I think it 100% is. Yeah, it's like Jamie Lee Curtis is on The Bear. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, for a couple, it's not like it was a series written for her. I mean, maybe the role was written for her, but she's not the focus of it. I mean, I think that all of this kind of stuff, Hollywood film has been so desecrated by, you know, the Marvel universe and all that shit that like, just to see anyone making an interesting, I imagine if you're an actor in Hollywood, if just someone offers you something interesting, it looks like fun and cool. And why, if you can afford to do it, why not just do it?
I'm glad you brought up the Marvel stuff because I just finished reading this like 500-page book about the MCU, like how it's all made. And
I just listened to your last episode where you were talking about it.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it is like, it doesn't really like glorify. It's not like a movie for Marvel. I mean, it is a book for Marvel fans. I mean, who else would read it, right? But it really talks about like just the production issues of that whole thing and how crazy it was. But one of the things it kind of glances on is like this whole like unhappy with your body isn't a female only thing anymore. And Marvel movies are kind of responsible. Like all these actors in these Marvel movies have to go get on drugs and get fucking jacked. And one of the funnier little parts of the book is like Paul Rudd. You know, he gets cast to be in a Marvel movie and he says, I had never worked out before. like, which is not surprising, like seeing Paul Rudd's career or whatever. But he talks about a scene where he's like been with the trainer for like 8 months or something like that. And he looks great in Ant-Man. Like to me, like
probably in the best shape of his life.
He literally said it kind of, he said being in Ant-Man probably added a few years to his life, but he's talked about how he's there for his fitting. And then also there for a fitting that day is Chris Hemsworth, who is juicy as fuck at that point, you know? And now you have, I mean, for example, Hugh Jackman is going to have to be on drugs and jacked for as long as they keep making that Wolverine money.
Right.
know?
Right.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting too. There's a lot of like conversation about he looked kind of chubby in his first portrayal of Wolverine. And at the time you're like, man, he looked great back then. But now like the male beauty standards have changed so much.
Well, just go back to the 70s. I could be a 70s action hero with
Oh,
this
totally.
body,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is preposterous.
But I
Burt
think
Lancaster, whatever, like all
Right.
those, the older,
yeah,
Yep,
but
yep.
I mean, but pharmacology really opened this up. You know, like there's so many drugs that you would be on, and it's interesting too. Like I think for a long time, women have always had these like beauty technologies to sort of like spend $1 million to look 2 months younger. And it hasn't really been around for men. Like maybe you had like a toupee or something like that, right? But you know, it was acceptable to be bald. You know, Mark, for example.
Thank you.
For a long time, but now it's like I know so many dudes that are on like hair meds and TRT and all this crazy shit, and it's like now it's available,
right.
And I'm like the moment I start,
Ozempic
the moment I start losing hair and morning boners, I'm going on all the shit, you know, like I can't wait to get jacked up on medicines.
Just go do it now.
The problem with all that stuff is I think you have to kind of stay on it. You know what I mean? And I'm always like,
you do.
Yeah, I know a guy who was on TRT and was looking pretty juicy, and then lost all of his fucking money and had to, like, one of the things he had to cut out when he was like rebuilding his finances was his TRT, and he was like fucked up from it.
Oh, no
In
doubt.
what way? Like
Just became
got tired and sluggish.
It's
and
almost like Demi Moore in
flabby.
this movie. It just happened super fast. It was like, because it went from like, you know, you're holding it together to just like, blah, and like the magic goes away. It's like total pumpkin at midnight shit.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait till I can afford Botox again.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Science, man. In this
just a
house, we
little-
believe in science.
Exactly. Just a little judicious use.
I say go for it.
Yeah. Oh, I've done it.
You have? I'm kidding. So I wanted to bring something up. I know I bring up often the idea that there's no such thing as an anti-war movie because by portraying the violence of war, you're by default celebrating it in cinema. And I feel like that, I mean, this is kind of what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about like, oh, maybe a French female director or a female director can critique these things differently than we're used to seeing. And I brought up the thing of Black British actors portraying American gangsters. It's interesting to me that I might be wrong, but I'm thinking this is a thing a French director could do that an American director wouldn't do, which is in cinema, embrace the thing that you're critiquing. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's all super complicated. Like Hollywood loves firearms on screen and hates firearms off screen. Like there's always these contradictions, right? But I think that there's something...
Fucking libs.
Sorry. So sorry. There's something so strikingly French about diving so deep into the gnarly territory of, again, using the camera to dissect women's bodies in order to make a critique about how women's bodies are viewed. Because I think, I know we've talked about this on previous Scary Thoughts episodes. Jennifer's Body is an example. Like, the movie is called Jennifer's Body, and it's all about how sexualized she is. And the film is so chaste and so afraid of sexualizing the protagonist who inspires lust in everybody she walks into a room with. Whereas this movie, there is no barrier to exploiting, to making a critique through exploitation cinema, in a sense, or the techniques of exploitation cinema. And I think that that is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's not a hypocrisy. It's just sort of embracing that there are these contradictions and that art doesn't need to play by those rules. And there's something so American about being afraid of those kinds of transgressions.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. And that's exactly what I was going to say. Good art doesn't have to explain itself. It's unafraid of working on multiple levels, and it understands that it's going to be problematic. I think, right, if it were American, I could imagine it having to explain itself and kind of make a moralizing statement. And this does what good art does, which is it's show, don't tell. And it's not insulting to the audience. It lets the audience, it does implicate the audience, but it lets the audience participate in that implication and go through the experience. And that's so valuable. I think there's so much in the over-explainy thing that doesn't allow people to go through experiences.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think there's like something Frenchy going on here, because it's like, the French like mimes. You know what I mean? So it's fucking.
The French aren't afraid of art. I mean, it's Europeans aren't afraid of art that they don't understand. We've gone and seen a lot of art in Europe, and there's a really different response to like. Yeah, I mean, it is easy to make fun of, and because it's so much of it is dorky, but it's also so great because they'll go see a thing they don't understand and not be mad at it for not explaining itself to them.
Yeah, there's something so...
It's a really different relationship to art.
We're talking about France, but like there's something so, let's say, German, and by extension European, about like someone from the audience coming up to the, let's say, choreographer or the theater director after a show and having wanting to have an engaged conversation about why they didn't like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But being engaged and interested.
And not having to shut it the fuck down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, back to the French thing, though. Like, I'm going to be stuck on this for a second because I also just watched Alien 4, which is a French director.
Yeah.
And I think that there are similar things happening with this movie and Alien 4, and it makes me think of how, like in Monty Python and Holy Grail, how the French are portrayed.
Yeah.
It seems very accurate. Like, I feel like
Wait, what do you...
Okay, so like the French guy in the parapet is just like both absurd and hilarious and sort of like effete and intellectual at the same time. Like he's making fart noises, but he's also literally above them.
Yeah.
Like there's something going on there. And so, with Alien 4, which we're unfortunately going to have to do a whole episode about, you have this example of like the Joss Whedon script, which is the most American comic booky thing you could possibly have, and this French guy just goes all over it. Like, so his whole thing was like, I am going to take this script and shit on it. And like he's even said, basically, the director said as much, And I wonder, like, there's a little bit of that going on here. But I feel like as soon as I said that, I realized like we're sort of like in what's the woman that did Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night? Lily Amanpour.
Amanpour.
Yeah. Anyway, that lady, who I have something else to say about in a second. She's such a fan of these movies in a really like deep way, and I feel like this filmmaker is such a clear fan of all the stuff that she references, which is fun nerd stuff.
Yeah.
But I also Lily Amanpour also has that short film that she does as part of that Netflix.
Oh, the Cabinet of Curiosities.
Yeah, Cabinet of Curiosities. It's about like the woman's
series.
Makeup, like kind of melting her face and stuff. And
right.
there's a lot of similar like digital camera straight on the pores of the face kind of stuff going on, which I think is kind of interesting and cool.
That.
Yeah.
No, that was good. A couple other philosophical moments in this hit me. There's one where, when she's about to kill... And she's about to, stab Sue through the heart with a syringe and end it all. And then this voice just kind of comes out of nowhere and says, "But you'll be all alone." And I love that kind of like existential loneliness thing. Like, again, what's she getting out of this relationship? Nothing. But it's sort of this thing of like, is a horrifying relationship with yourself better than no relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds something I was thinking of, speaking of being alone, is that I was thinking about how does this movie function as a horror movie, and something we've often talked about is when a lot of horror movies, it depends on, you've got to get people alone. That's how you kill them. In the 70s, it was in the forest, or a house at the end of the street, or, and now they need to lose their cell phone or have no bars so that they're alone and cut off. In this movie, she is so alone. The first scene we see with her, she's surrounded by other older women, smiling, having a great time. The whole studio is focused in on her. She walks down that long hall, and she is so alone. Her life is over. She doesn't seem to have anybody to reach out to.
She has nowhere to go.
She has nowhere to go. When she feels like she needs to connect, she calls some guy she's seen once since, I think it was high school.
She saw by chance.
Yeah. And so she's sort of like alone with herself.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes. There is, again, a little bit of a like fairy tale, like Geppetto / there's Narcissus, and then there's the one where he Galatea, and it's what My Fair Lady is based on, is the Pygmalion. Yeah. Isn't that about kind of creating someone to keep you company?
Oh.
Is he lonely? I don't know. Maybe he's not lonely at the beginning, but it's this idea of like creating, this terrible relationship. Is the terrible relationship better than none? And and maybe it is. Like she's so terribly lonely. And then I feel like there is definitely like some birth and mothering stuff in so much of it.
For sure.
Just like even at the end, she has, this syringe that's just called termination, which is very much that way we speak about abortion. But there's also just like really what ostensibly, you get lots of joy out of parenting, I guess.
No, nobody in this room knows.
I mean, I parent some dogs.
Yeah. And I thought there was another great, it's the moment of the date where she keeps seeing Sue, and that's kind of what unhinges her before she's about to walk out the door. And she goes and just checks on Sue. And it reminds me of how people will check on their sleeping babies. She goes to check on, and she sees like the angelic sleeping Sue. And then that like unspools her.
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh, there's my sweet angel. Okay, I'm gonna go. It's because it's not that kind of a relationship. It's not her child. Maybe it is that she kind of just starts out as a relatively empty person who, can't have that kind of relationship with herself or anyone.
I mean, it's like the whole apartment's empty, except for the picture of her.
That's the only noteworthy thing.
And then we see like a heavy cleaning lady at one point, like a fat lady vacuuming.
Yeah.
With like a 50s vacuum cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not even 50s. It's more of a 70s
Yeah. With an oldie-timey vacuum cleaner. Yeah.
As a fan of vacuum technology, that was one of the things I noticed.
Totally. There's definitely a lot of like Fauxnique in here too, though. Like the magazine face. I was like, oh my God, I've done that. Yeah. Like the magazine face, and the sort of, there were things someone else was like, oh, and it sort of like the monstrous thing reminded me of like when you did the tape body.
Oh yeah.
Just, yeah,
totally.
It definitely was. I feel like it was up my alley in terms of aesthetic. In that way, like when she stuck the magazine page to her face, or the photograph to her face, I was like, oh my God.
I felt like that was like, I thought two things when I saw that. One, I thought like it's such a doable Halloween costume.
Oh, completely.
Like just you get to print out a Demi Moore's face and then a big ass ball gown from some, like some junior prom or something like that.
And a weird random boob and some teeth on your head.
Yeah. Then I thought like, I could totally see somebody doing this at Tranny Shack.
Oh yeah, I wonder if anyone's done drag substance. I went to a rave the day after Halloween, and there were a lot of children there. By children, I mean, people in their 20s. And one of them was dressed as young Sue in the pink bodysuit thing, and she had like a syringe.
Nice. Could you explain to our listeners about the 20-minute workout, Monique?
Oh my God. Did you ever see the 20-minute workout, Chad?
No.
Probably not.
No.
Okay. It was in the early 80s. I think I was 11 or 12 when it aired. And it was just close-ups. It was women in high cut, very early days of like the high cut leotard, no tights. They all looked kind of like Nagel women, like Patrick Nagel.
7 a.m., right? 6 a.m.?
It was on in the morning. I mean, I
dawn?
think they played it at different times. I
Okay.
think it was on HBO, maybe,
Oh,
or on
really?
cable. It was on cable.
Okay.
And I think so they might have aired it at several times a day or at intervals during the day. But it was just like women, like the camera zooming in on their asses and down, and their boobs. And then the women were just, you can't see me because this is audio, but they're just like making sex faces and
Weird.
like they're exhaling, but they're making sex faces. And yeah, I mean, I used to do it as a workout.
Well, in Clueless, they're doing aerobics.
Yeah, but this wasn't aerobics.
It wasn't aerobics.
This
there was
was
no,
porn
she wasn't
with
even
clothing on.
It was just music and these women exercising. None of them were saying, okay, now get in a bridge and lift your butt. 5 more. Okay, you got it, ladies. Like it wasn't even that. It was just like these women doing exercising.
Huh.
In scare quotes, exercising. Yeah, we'll need to find some and send it to you.
It,
We'll
it
look
was
at
like
it.
when we watched Sue's show, there's a camp value to that because it's like, this is ridiculous, right? This is maybe where the male gaze begins in this show. Well, that was actually a thing in the early 80s, is there wasn't even a pretense that this is necessarily just an exercise show.
Huh.
Yeah.
I feel like that sort of like check me out and work out along with me has definitely moved to YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like there's like there was another thing I was thinking about too was
And Instagram.
yeah, and Instagram was like it feels like the world of this movie is like a French take on Greg Araki's LA. Like that's the vibe that I got. But then I was thinking about like the whole she's gone on 1 week, off a week, sort of like offshore oil workers are.
Oh, wow.
And but like now you could see if she had an internet show, she could have probably existed a lot easier with that.
Right.
Like because she could have
Right.
just done it on her own.
Tape it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, Sue.
It's interesting too. Like that actress is 30, so
Margaret Qualley.
it's interesting. She's like they're both sort of older, playing younger.
Yeah.
With but and I don't know that matters at all. But I remember thinking she was like so cute in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes.
But because she's 17, you're like gross. It's the film does a really good job of like making her really alluring and then shutting it down immediately,
Right.
along with like because you sort of like relate to Cliff Booth.
Totally.
And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, fuck that. I'm not going to
Right.
jail. But I remember just like having seen her body in that movie, like the boobs looked so fake to me. And
In
like,
this?
in this,
They are. Yeah.
they're like glued on.
Yeah.
And it's funny though, like just another piece of like practical effects makeup, which I think that's one of the best things about this movie is all the weird practical effects.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. It's artful and strange and helpful.
Yeah, and Demi Moore made a point about how like you're in all this shit, so it makes you make choices because you're in it. And then Margaret Qualley, she was saying how she's crying in her makeup when she's the monster, and the whole time her face is just in the makeup, full of snot and tears, and so it just adds to this like level of grotesqueness, which you're not getting with like a green screen,
Right. And you're getting a truly internal. There's so much that's so interesting because there's so much about Hollywood acting that's like feel the feeling and let the camera do all the work. And like like film acting is just, it's so subtle. I'm sure it's really harder than it sounds and then it looks. Is that your job as a film actor is to like really feel the feelings and then let the camera get footage of you feeling the feelings. But then if you're really, if you're doing your work and sometimes you might cry, and then so that would be like, so Oscar worthy cry on screen, and that she's doing it under a prosthesis, so it's a weirdly like wasted cry in a way, but it's not, because it's lending her this other sensation and it's lending this other layer of texture
Yeah.
to the performance.
man, I feel like you could never trust someone that could just cry like that, like an actress.
Mm.
I mean, I've had one acting gig. I was in a music video, and there's a scene where I'm supposed to be like all upset and like all this shit. And I remember at the time just being like, I have no idea how to do this. Like this is fucking hard.
Are you saying you couldn't trust someone because they could manipulate you?
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's just like the type of brain that could do that. It's just.
Well, I remember, it's interesting you say that because I remember actually where Monique and I met at this theater program, one of my teachers addressed that, and his take on it, and it doesn't, just because he had a take on it doesn't mean he's right. But he actually brought that up and really contested it because he was saying that actors have to be so real and grounded in their real life as a stable place to leap from to get into characters, that they don't, it's not about spending your whole life. It's not like a stand-up comedian who can never fucking stop trying to make people laugh. Obviously we can see a lot of actors that just don't know how to fucking shut it off, right?
Yeah.
But he brought up this idea that you need to be able to retreat to a place that is real and authentic.
Yeah. Stable.
Yeah, that's outside of the artifice.
And that you wouldn't be, just like, oh, I'm going to pull one over on my boyfriend by turning on the waterworks that I know how to do. I mean, I'm sure there are, mentally ill people who conduct their lives in that way. But I think that a good actor and a grounded person, and sure, not all good actors are grounded people.
No.
But you get it when you hear certain actors. I feel like certain actors speak about it. I just listened to a great interview with Saoirse Ronan, who seems really grounded and solid. And it's like where you have to go to get that sensation and get that feeling and bring it to the work, as they say.
Yeah.
It makes me think of two things. One, there's that story about Dustin Hoffman on Marathon Man and how he's trying to get in the role, and he's like staying up super late.
Yes.
And then Olivier was like, "Why don't you just try acting my dear boy?"
My dear boy.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally. Well, I mean, that actually, I'm glad you brought that up because Monique, earlier when you were talking about in film, you feel the emotion and the camera picks it up. But that's, of course, a condition of Hollywood cinema post 70s, right? There are these demarcations, and it's sort of like when what's the first slasher film? What's the first zombie movie? When did Hollywood cinema stop being grand pronouncements in the Mid-Atlantic?
Darling, you shouldn't have come. Why are you here? No, but I love you.
That no one in a Hollywood movie cried on screen until the 70s. That's obviously not true, but we talk about method acting, and I think that there's a gross misunderstanding about what that means and what its history is. But what we generally mean when we bring up like Marlon Brando, Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep, actors like that, is this idea that they are going through something and the camera's picking it up. That wasn't happening in the 50s.
Yeah.
And you just need to watch any fucking movie from the 50s or early 60s
and it's
to know that they are not experiencing their characters.
Totally.
Feelings.
It's a different kind of filmmaking,
Totally.
too. I mean, what was that wonderful YouTube channel about film we were watching when it was talking about the mid shot? What, it was a certain kind of shot that it was like, oh, we used this shot. It was two people, just a shot of two people talking that to each other, like they're in a play, is actually kind of a hard scene to play, and it's not it's not used a lot in contemporary film.
Totally.
But it's used, you see it all over, His Girl Friday, or, all of those films that were made a little bit more like plays, and we have a little bit of emotional distance, whereas now we're like getting all up in people's faces.
And they're whispering, and then you can't understand.
Oh my God, that is
they can all talk so quietly.
Fucking with my brain so much. Everything is mumblecore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing is like thinking about that, and then also just filmmakers come up at a certain time. Like it's so interesting to hear her, the director, just talking about her inspirations as like these things that I just sort of like absorbed. And when I was thinking about film and wanting to make movies and stuff like that, I was like, oh, I have to think about really good films of the past. And here she is just like, The Fly. Which is, I think it's a great film too, but I think like when The Fly came out, I don't think anybody would have thought like this is going to inspire a really groundbreaking feminist movie like 40 years from now.
Right.
maybe it would. I mean, maybe people had that vision, but it's interesting to see a lot of the stuff that I was very into growing up. And I consider like myself having sort of like juvenile tastes. And now like people are making like great stuff with these juvenile inspirations.
Totally. I think one of the inspirations was the Call on Me video, which was then inspired by, was itself inspired by 80s exercise. So it's this kind of full circle thing. And then there's so much with Sue as Sinister Barbie. There's so much like Coke commercial. She like opens a Diet Coke and it fizzes and we see her mouth and then we see her butt. And, it's like the sort of commercials are a huge influence in this too. And I think, again, there's a kind of wonderful artistic freedom there around letting yourself be inspired by high, low, fashion, commercials, art, the Elephant Man, the Fly, The Shining, and everything in between. And like, quinceañera, a little snow globe. I mean, the costuming and stuff is also coming from all these other places. It's very rigorous, but there's so much in it.
And the set design too, right? Like the colors of Sue's exercise show versus the colors of Elizabeth's exercise show versus the colors of the bathroom where it all takes place versus the colors of the birthing canal, the hallway in the studio. Everything has these really, I don't want to say restrictive palettes because that makes it sound like, say, the exercise show has a limited palette, but it is in a sense specific.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. She referred to it as a maximalist film, which I thought was interesting because, I mean, obviously there's a bunch of like bright maximalist looking shit in it, but it's also really minimal. Like there's hardly anything in some of these scenes, especially the bathroom. Something I noticed in the bathroom was like a woman of her age who would go as far as to do this had like a remarkably small amount of products in the bathroom. I thought it was because like one of my favorite things in Eyes Wide Shut is their bathroom and how like all of Nicole Kidman's character shit is just floor to ceiling women's bathroom nightmare.
I've never seen it. I kind of feel like I should see it, especially after the last season of You Must Remember This. Erotic 90s.
This is another like film that like at the time I didn't like it. Like when I saw it, I saw it in the theater. I was like, I'm not into this at all. But I saw it recently, and like a lot of the stuff that bothered me about it, like for example, the I can't remember what it's called, but when there's a screen behind the actor and they're filming it,
blue screen,
not blue
chroma
screen.
key.
No, it's like when it's projected.
Rear projection.
Yeah, rear projection. Yeah. There's like scenes of him walking as rear projection, and then it's New York on the sound stage. So whereas like, why wouldn't you just like Scorsese'd it and gone and shot the mean streets of New York? You go like, it seems like it would have been way harder to actually build New York in London.
Doesn't Kubrick famously not get on planes? Like, isn't he another one of those won't get on a plane, won't leave London?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. I thought he was one of those. Yeah. This is part of Karina Longworth's project in both of those arcs of You Must Remember This, erotic 80s and erotic 90s. Yeah, a lot of these movies she's rethinking and kind of getting into like they weren't as bad as we thought they were. And that Eyes Wide Shut is super flawed, but not as bad as everybody thought. I'd like to see it. Anyway, the products. But I also feel like minimalism is this kind of privileged thing. Like the richer you are, the more you get to build solutions to hide all your shit.
Mm-hmm. Or you can just go get more of it when you don't need it anymore.
That's true.
Like our fridge is always empty. Just go down the street and order a burrito.
Yeah. And though also the thing of procedures versus lots and lots of products.
Mm-hmm. Or that like you would have enough money to hire out to do something for someone, like was it like her extensive bathroom remodel. I was thinking about like how many tools it would take to do that. Like how difficult, like, because if we're looking at like a bathroom remodel right now and fuck, man, like that'd be like 4 months. Like she's real
handy.
Yeah, and then she builds that under the skin room.
Exactly.
Totally. Yes.
Exactly. I mean, that's just the fableness of it. That which I think is. I mean, I like when a movie like goes far into fable.
you know, and
Totally.
then it gives you permission to just shut your brain down and enjoy the myth that you're seeing.
Exactly.
Instead of being, like a fucking nerd about it, you know.
It was complete. That would have taken 4 months. No, totally. I mean, that's it. All felt completely appropriate to this film.
Yeah, or like, I mean, it's funny how much dream logic there is kind of too, right? Like, so her apartment is clearly awesome. You know, like I would be stoked to live there. But then when she looks across the hall to like her Kramer neighbor, his place looks kind of shitty. So you're like, what is this building that they're in? Like, you know,
choices people are making. Also, okay, at the very end of the film, Sue is on set and basically just like walks past some trailers and then she's in her apartment. Like she's on set, she has her tooth falls out, she has her ear falls off, and then she stumbles past all these trailers, you know, almost in a blackout, and then she's suddenly home. Like,
I think
do we think she got in her car and drove home, or do you think she lives basically on the set? Like,
I think it's a reference to The Shining.
Oh,
And the fact that the floor plan doesn't make sense. Because like immediately after that, there's like the blood in the hallway with the geometric carpet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
The blood in the hallway is fucking hilarious to me. They had to build their own theater set, like with the audience, because they were going to film it at a location. And they're like, well, how damaging is this going to be? And they're like, it's going to be like a fucking gore concert. You know?
And then just when this like suddenly it's
I was immediately like, oh, this is like gore, like just the choice of heavy metal and stuff like that. And I thought it was another mirroring scene because in the very beginning, Dennis Quaid's talking about being 50 and, you know, the stuff doesn't work like it used to. And he's kind of like talking about like, you know, her sexual viability really, which I think is paired with like menstruation probably. But then she comes out in the end and just like
throws the boob and hoses everyone down with blood. Well, and also just the fact that there's like a 5-year-old girl dressed in Sue's outfit that she hasn't even worn on stage yet. And then there's all these topless showgirls. And then just the topless showgirls standing in this configuration that also reminded me, and like the bloodbath too, and the heavy metal. Actually, it was very like Matthew Barney reference, who's an American artist, but it's again like being unafraid to kind of refer to use the cadence and the language and the kind of timing and rhythm of visual art.
Yeah, the rhythm too. It made me think of how that could be another like David Lynch reference because in like Wild at Heart, it's just a like 50s looking movie, but then when the violence happens, there's like heavy metal.
Yes,
and I remember,
oh my god, so good.
I remember like at the time when I went to see that movie with my mom, and I was like so invested in heavy metal, and it was the first time I'd ever heard heavy metal in a movie, and I was like, "This is fucking it. We made it, boys."
Such a good movie.
Yeah.
Well,
all right, Chad. So if this was a Tales from the Crypt episode and you were the Crypt Keeper, what's your little punchy?
Oh, you wanted a joke. Fuck, I didn't come with that. I was just thinking about, it made me think of like Tales from the Crypt. I don't have a joke, but you know, it's like, I don't know.
Monique?
Take care of yourself.
Well,
I know she says it, but
it needs a pun.
Right.
I know I should have prepared for this. I was not picking up what you were putting down. I got so caught into one of my favorite Tales from the Crypt stories, and it's the same in the comic as it is in the show on HBO. But The Switch, do you know that one?
No.
So it's about an old man who's filthy rich, and he's trying to get this young girl, and she's not having it because, you know, she wants a young man, or she says she does. And so he goes to this doctor, this like shady doctor. The doctors that promise youth are always shady. And then he gets a new head. Like he trades his head with another guy. And so now he has this young face. And the whole show is basically him like, now he has his shirt off and he's got an old man shirt. So he has to basically spend all of his fortune to switch the bodies with this younger guy. But he's like hiding his wealth from this young girl. So she doesn't know. She just thinks he's old. And at the very end, the young person whose body he switched with has all of his money and he gets the girl. Aww. But that's like but that's like, I mean, Tales from the Crypt is all like morality.
Yes.
Like over and over and over again.
Well, tell you what, think of one and we'll put it in the show notes. And listeners, look at your phone right now, and there's going to be something hilarious.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
I'll go check my tomes.
Yeah.
I still have like all my Tales from the Crypt
Oh
comics.
my gosh.
That's awesome.
It did remind me, I know I'm going back into the film though, but this idea of like having to, this giving birth thing, like we give birth to the next generation that's supposed to hate us and kill us.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this movie just sort of like watches that happen. Like, cause it's sort of like supposed to happen in theory, but then when it happens and how it happens, it's just always such a bummer and so violent.
Yeah.
It also reminded me of that, like the Buddhist adage, like if you see the Buddha on the trail, kill him. Like basically if you need to go your own way, you can't be believing in another person, like living in another person's life. So it just makes me think of like these fables or adages or ideas that are about doing away with or replacing or killing the next generation or the thing. It's like, what's the reality of that happening? Is it like you really smashing someone's head into a glass table?
Sure.
If you had the substance and could create a younger you, what would you do?
Teach aerobics on TV. Make it learn to code. I was thinking about this, like what it's the difference between like you're suddenly younger versus there's just a younger version of you out there. I feel like the younger version of me, like kick rocks, like give a fuck. Nobody help me. Like you're on your own, bro.
Mm.
But of course, you are one, is what they say. But if you did it tomorrow, you are that young person.
Right. I see what you're saying.
You are that person.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the person who's old, but we don't privilege the old one as being the real one anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that two people have the exact same consciousness with different bodies. The old one doesn't persevere more in memory and consciousness. So
I'd probably try to see if I could be like a Marine Ranger or something like that. Something really physically difficult, because that would be appealing to me.
yeah.
You know, and just get ready to go fight the next war, I guess.
Get killed faster.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this sort of like makes me think of what we were saying early at the very beginning, is that she's still her shitty self. And like, I'm sitting here like kind of stumped with like what I would do with like a young version of myself now.
Well, I think there's two things going on, right? Is, okay, there's a young, ostensibly prettier version. I think that baked into some of the code of this, the symbolism in this movie is that also the younger version levels up, is a level up from even your younger self. It's an improvement in some way. So there's that. But then there's also the longevity component. So it's not that you look younger, because it's that you look younger. You're still the same person. So you get more time, but you also get to inhabit that body again.
Yeah. I feel like I would definitely, whatever my younger self went off to do, I would want it to be like financially
The same.
like good, you know, because I think one of the things that really struck me is that scene where she comes back and she's been watching TV all night and her chair is just flattened in and there's a bunch of junk food and the TV's on. I was like, and I came back to the spot in my house that looks just like that. I was like, oh, lame. I was like, I'm as lame as old Demi Moore here is, you know? And then I thought about how you have to really work to not get like really calcified in your old age. Because I was like, oh, you know, she should be like, oh, Sue's out there making all the money. I don't have to do anything else anymore. I'm just going to go out and live my life, have fun, go do Pilates, adopt a dog, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
enjoy retirement.
And she sort of like doesn't do that at all. Like she does it. And a part of, I guess maybe it's just another one of the things about the movie that's sort of like, if you were like to be an actually like nerd, you'd be like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. But she went from being on set, kind of the center of attention or something like that. You'd think she'd at least be going out to dinner with her friends or something, you know?
Although my impression is that what's happening in the film is that the split causes one to go in one direction and the other to go in the other direction. And for her, it is the sort of shock, rejection, aloneness, she knew the world was harsh. She's been fighting age her whole life. And then she gets fired. And it's sort of like what she does to try to stave off aging actually, in a sense, accelerates her inner experience of her own age. Like the reality of how, I'm not saying she is useless, but it's almost like she proves the universe correct
That's
by discovering how deep that ugliness in the world really is.
yes, that's why it's a tragedy.
Yeah, you'd physically
Yes.
feel it too. Like, I mean, it makes me think of in Rick and Morty when Rick becomes teenage Rick,
Yes.
and then he goes back to his old body and he's like, I can feel my bones grinding against each other.
Yes.
I feel like you might have like a little bit of that. Like
Totally.
if you're Sue, you're like, holy fuck, I know like how bad, like how much better. I bet like if we were snapped into our 18-year-old bodies right now, we would feel like we were on fucking drugs. It would probably feel, it would actually probably feel pretty good.
And kick our old bodies to the curb.
Oh, for sure.
And just start sucking the essence out of a pustule, junky pustule.
Ew. What would you do with your Sue?
I mean, if it were the fable, if it were sort of the conditions of this film, you know, I definitely would try to sort of set it up with a long, hard talk between the selves and like remind myself to set my older self up for some kind of success and maybe put a time limit on it. I don't know. But I feel like it is that thing, right? Of like when you become the young self, do you have the wisdom of the old self? Like we're to posit that, yes, you do, correct? Like it's the quote unquote same brain.
Yes. However, something I was sort of alluding to earlier is my belief that as soon as you get into that body, a lot of things might go out the window
It's
very
just
fast.
seductive.
It's just
Yes.
you can be just down with your people, and the second you win the lottery, you're just like later.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, that's kind of what it
You
seems.
turn your world inside out.
Like all the BLM activists that bought mansions
Yes.
and nice neighborhoods.
100%.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. No, I mean, I feel like I would go be a pop star.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Make some money, have some fun.
Yeah. Although, if I may.
But you can't do that. Like doing that at a week at a time is sort of like what Sue tries to do, and it totally backfires.
Well, you could figure out a way.
Yeah, make some money, sock it away.
Right. Although, if it was about making money, there are way better ways to use wisdom and youthful looks to make money than to be a pop star. Like, pop star is like.
I mean, an art star, pop star, you know, just like why I say pop star is like make something fun and cool that makes money. I don't know. It's a bit of a vampire fantasy. It's like, you know, in vampire tales, like where do they get their money? Who cares? They just have it. And then they get to do cool shit.
Yeah.
The last couple of days, I've been walking the dogs like for miles a day, right? Because I got to wear this shitty rescue dog out. So I've been daydreaming a lot. And it was funny. I was like daydreaming about just like having a slightly better creative director position. And I was like, what a waste of fucking daydreaming time. I was like, why wouldn't I be like daydreaming about being like the greatest country guitarist of all time and famous? You know, like I was thinking about like a failure of imagination, like, because in your brain, I should be flying around right now. Like, so why? I think that's a really fucked up thing that happens as you get older is your imagination sort of like narrows into the you don't let yourself like imagine the impossible as much.
I don't know. Speak for yourself. I daydream about being invisible all the time.
Is that the superpower that you would pick?
That's my
I
go-to.
don't daydream regularly, but I do like when I go in the ocean, I pretend I'm a mermaid.
It's pretty good. I don't think about it so much anymore, but I was thinking about like, say you had your brain intact, right? Like you have all your thoughts and memories and you could go back in time, but your consciousness stayed with you. Like what age would you go back to? Like how far back would you go?
Mark and I had talked about this a few months ago.
It's pretty tough. I think what's hard is for me, if I was to go like, oh, I wish I could go back to when I was 20, let's say 24, right? Mm-hmm. Just not that there was anything at that moment in my life that I want to return to, but that seems like a good point to sort of like launch a new direction with the insight of age. But actually, what I would probably want to do is go back to 16 so I could set that 24-year-old up better with, I don't know, better schooling or something like that. But then you'd have to fucking tolerate being in high school again. And the amount of creative energy you would have to expend to just get that over with, but also make it work for you in a way that would set your 24-year-old self up. So I feel like it's anything after high school when you can actually start to make your own rules. But again, do I really want to go through university again? I mean, I just did it, and I don't know if I could have done 4 years of undergraduate work. I only did 2 of master's work.
For me, I would go quite far back, like, because you have your brain, right? Like, you're you. I would go back to be like 5, and then you just say some basic shit that you know now, and it just sounds amazing out of a 5-year-old, and now you're like going to like genius school or something as a kid, and your whole trajectory changes, and then you sort of like,
that sets you up for kind of a lonely life, though.
That's fine.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I also feel like, okay, I'm going to be 16. I wake up, hey, Mom, Dad, actually, I drink alcohol now because I'm in my 50s, and curfew's got to go. I can give you some tips on some stocks.
Like having to live all that time actually does sound brutal.
Yeah.
But yeah, sort of 19 or 20 sounds doable.
Yeah.
With the wisdom I have. And it's just like the thing I feel like was missing the most was confidence.
Interesting. I think I just wasted an awful lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah, working on skills that are a little, I don't know, I'm actually, this is like so corny, but I'm happy with my life in a lot of ways. Like it's sort of like I would want just like more and better of the same.
Yeah.
And not kind of try and craft myself into some kind of, like, it doesn't appeal to me to like have the mind of a 50-year-old inside a 5-year-old and then and like try and craft a like strange life in that particular way. But it's sort of like, okay, how would I elevate and I don't know, like elevate and optimize based on the knowledge I have. And it's like, I don't know, there is a bit of a cliche of like, especially with women talking to women, but probably we all have heard this sort of like, what would you tell your younger self? It's how Julia Louis-Dreyfus ends all of her interviews on her wonderful podcast called Wiser Than Me, which is just Julia Louis-Dreyfus talking to women who are older than her. And she always, says, what would you tell your younger self? And a lot of them are just like, relax. Like, don't be so uptight. Don't worry about perfection. There's a lot of that. Like, and I think I would do the same. It's like, I probably could have gotten a lot more done with what I had if I had more confidence and could just lighten the fuck up.
It's funny. Like, I wonder if it's a male female thing, but I would be way more like specific. Like for example, don't get dogs. Like that would be like something I would tell myself.
But you tell yourself that now and listen.
Well, I'm married now. Like when you're married to someone who has a different agenda that includes having dogs, it's a totally different deal. It's like you're just in it with somebody, and their terrible decisions are your terrible decisions. Another thing I would have told myself is don't go to college. Just lie about the college you went to and just go work for startups. Like that would be like I would have completely skipped going to college.
Yeah.
Just like a waste of 5 years of my life.
Yeah. And a lot of money.
No money for me, but
You weren't all scholarship.
Fuck yeah, dude. I didn't pay a penny for college.
Really?
Yeah. I actually made about 30 grand.
That's great.
Yeah.
What kind of fucking scams were you running? That's
just
crazy.
Being poor, man. Like that's all. And also, if you're willing to fill out paperwork, I went into the City College financial aid office, which clearly no one had ever gone into before because of how surprised the woman there was to see me. And I said, I have no money. I would like to get some money. I've heard that there's money. And she's like, well, what's your major? I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, depending on your major, you can get this, or this. And I was like, well, how do they check? Like, do they check your major? And she's like, well, no, not really. I was like, so I could apply to all of these. And she's like, yeah,
Amazing.
she's like, you could, but like nobody has time for that. I was like,
All I got is
au
time.
contraire. Like I bartend 2 nights a week. And so I just filled out fucking everything. And I got like thousands of dollars just cash. I remember there was this old lady, she was in her 80s and she had been a nurse or something like that. And her husband had this like sort of like endowment or something like that. And it was for nursing students. It was like $300 and nobody filled it out. Nobody went for it. And I just said, hey, I'm not a nursing student, but I'm broke and I need some money for stuff. So if nobody else asked for it, I'll take it. Boom. I got like a couple $100 in the mail.
Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty
Amazing.
crazy. And
Love
then I thought for sure I would have to pay to go to Berkeley. Like it was crazy to me that would be a free thing, but it's free.
Huh.
Yeah.
Rad.
I wouldn't have gone if it had cost me a penny.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got the governor's, Arnold Schwarzenegger gave me some money. There was like a
No
governor's
wonder
fund.
you're so obsessed with him. He paid for your education,
Yeah, dude.
like a rich dad.
I still remember the phase pedal I got with my George Bush check.
I will be your rich dad.
Yeah, I'll always love Schwarzenegger. The only time I've ever voted was for Schwarzenegger for governor.
God.
I just couldn't help it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, we're way off the rails.
Yeah, we are.
Anybody have any notes of anything? Is that it?
Oh. You're always like, not always, but you've said, what's your secret? And then it's something terrible. Like, oh, you lost someone. You've said this joke before. It's like, what's your secret? Or maybe it's just like a stock thing. But Demi Moore, I guess, had shingles before this and lost a quick 20 pounds.
Oh, like you look amazing.
Yeah. What's your secret?
Uh-huh.
It's like, or maybe this sounds so dark, but I feel like it might have been a skit or something like that. Because in my brain, it's like,
So not Monique, but something you saw on TV.
maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't say what's your secret, but
Is it not? Maybe it's Crystal.
No.
I don't know. Some lady around me
Okay.
said that, and
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I must have just
she got shingles and
Yeah.
lost
20
oh,
pounds before she
God.
started. So
That's
I'm wondering,
sad.
like, if it weren't for shingles, if the body horror element of her being older would have worked better. Like, if she wouldn't have been as fit.
Wow.
Or yeah, maybe she was drawing on those shingles for inspo.
Yeah.
With those back stitches with all the shower water just getting into the gaping back stitch was really wigging me out. Actually, that was one of the most horrifying moments.
It's weird too, because it's like they should have just given her a stapler. You know what I mean? And then I went back and looked. I didn't see thread in the kit. So I was like, did she just decide to come sew the back up wherever?
I don't know. I feel like there are parts of the kit that we didn't see. I think there have got to be instructions and just little bits and bobs that weren't in the shot. That's what I figured.
So what have we learned?
Don't trust your younger self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
or young people in general.
Yeah, young people suck.
Except our listeners.
There's no young listeners of Scary Thoughts.
Probably true. Thanks for joining us, Monique.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So fun. Always so fun to talk with you guys.
I think we've been threatening to have you on to do Silence of the Lambs for a long time, but
Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
That's news to me.
oh, maybe I just think about it all the time when
I'd
I think
love
about
to.
being invisible. Thanks for listening. Stop.
Oh, I hurt my rib laughing, trying to hold that laugh in. Oh no.